and welcome back to another episode of Boundless Body Podcast. I'm your host, Casey Ruff, and today we are here with Dr. Mark Cucuzzella. Dr. Mark Cucuzzella is a family doctor working in West Virginia, the state with the highest rates of obesity and type 2 diabetes in the country. In 2012, he realized that the standard diet and exercise recommendations were flawed, and he shifted into the low-carbohydrate world. Mark is also a lieutenant colonel in the United States Air Force, where he designs fitness programs. He is an avid runner, competing for over 30 years, completing more than 100 marathon and ultramarathons. He also owns Two Rivers Treads, a running store in his hometown in West Virginia. Dr. Cucuzzella, welcome to the show.
My privilege, Casey, to be on. So enjoyed meeting you in Denver. So we'll have a nice conversation today.
Yeah, definitely. So we met in March of 2020, which will go down as one of the most bizarre months and most bizarre weekends ever.
Bizarre months and a bizarre year, which will turn into a bizarre 10 years.
So true.
You know how all this is going to end? It's more bizarre by the week, I think.
Exactly. That Thursday that I got there, people were still kind of like shaking hands and people were hugging and they were thinking like, oh, my immune system's good because I do low carb. And by the end of the week, the place was a ghost town. And my step-parents asked me to go to the store and grab toilet paper and saltine crackers. And I was like, okay, sure, I can do that. And they were all gone. And so I brought them napkins and club crackers.
Gosh.
Very strange. Very strange. Well, when I told Bethany that I was having you on, I told her your name. And she goes, isn't that a musical instrument, Cucuzella? And I looked at her and I said, wait a second, you're thinking Vuvuzela, which was made famous by the 2010 World Cup, those horns. But that's a nice mnemonic device. I can now remember how to say your name.
I didn't know about that. I'm going to have to look that up.
Vuvuzela. I think by the end of
the horns, I didn't know what they were.
Yeah, by the end of the tournament, I think they were kind of banning them because it was just like incessant horns during the soccer games. Pretty crazy. Good way to remember your name. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do and why you got into medicine.
Yes, I got into medicine because I was a broken runner. So, you and Bethany are very much in the athletic space. I mean, you learn from your mistakes, and I was, a college runner, and we knew nothing about training and staying healthy. You just show up for practice, and the last one standing tends to make it through the season. But that was just the culture, I think, of all sports. We didn't really know any of all this. Bethany's into fascia and foam rolling and nutrition. I mean, so we were just, eat pizza, run as hard as we could, and drink on weekends and repeat. And you wonder why you always had some kind of tendinopathy. We didn't know anything about recovery. But I started hanging out with with our team physician, who was this really fascinating guy. His name was Daniel Colin. And he was like the mad scientist of running injuries. He ended up writing a couple textbooks on running medicine. That term hadn't even existed. But he took like an hour with you and actually did all kinds of like assessments that you never had done in a doctor office. He would actually watch you run. He had a toaster oven. He was shaping these little soft inserts because if your feet were jacked up, he would try to correct that. And he had a big whirlpool in his office too, and back then, most whirlpools were just for kind of hanging out like in a hot tub, but he would throw you in there and make you run in there. Because heck, if you did it for horses, you might as well do it for humans, water running. And, that now is a well-accepted form of, rehab for running injuries and actually training. When people are just trying to minimize the load on their body, you can get yourself really fit just running in the water and stepping on the land every now and then. And there's a lot of swimmers now with COVID. This guy set 2 world records last weekend. I don't follow swimming that closely. I wish I could remember his name, but they were showing his training regimen, which involved very little pool time. He's in his yard, like throwing tires up into the air, sprinting like a madman, just like barn fit. The dude could, knocking off pull-ups, but then he jumps in the pool and crushes everybody because his technique was good.
Wow. Interesting. Huh. So when did you realize the diet was part of the puzzle that you needed to figure out?
Well, I always knew, I was an Air Force doc, became a flight doc where prevention is key. And we all had to pass fitness tests. And, I read a lot on nutrition. At least I thought I did. And I was pretty lean and thought I was healthy. But, we all kind of knew that junk food was bad and soda was bad. But we were raised with this paradigm of low fat, keeps you lean. And if you eat fast, you get fat, and, the food pyramid. And that's what we learned in med school, and that's what we taught. And it seemed okay in the military when I was active duty, because most people, had to maintain weight standards. So I didn't see the obesity epidemic until I got out of the military and moved to West Virginia. So I lived in Colorado early part of my career, and then I moved to West Virginia to be back closer to family. And everything was different here. We're like you mentioned in the intro, number one obese state in the nation, number one diabetes state. And I still thought the same paradigms were true, that you had to just eat less and exercise more, but it never seemed to work. But in hindsight, everything becomes more clear. In 2012, I was brought on for a 6-month assignment by the Air Force, Casey, to help design a fitness program to help people with the test. And most of that involved running, because running was the biggest part of the test. But I dug deep into why people failed and noticed immediately obesity was a big driver. The lines travel together. If you're obese, your odds of passing are less. It's a linear line. Leaner people passed, more obese had more difficulty. And, my own bias at the time was, well, they just need to probably exercise more and eat less. But then, when you looked at the cohorts, they were all doing the same thing. These are units that live together, travel together, train together, eat together. So there was more to it than that. And just kind of serendipitously, I came across, as I'm studying obesity a little bit for this project, I came across Gary Taub's New York Times article, Maybe It's All Been a Big Fat Lie, which was published, I think that was about 2010. That was the first really disruptive media piece. It took him like 10 years to write that. And I was like, this kind of makes sense. He turns the food pyramid upside down. And, I understood some basic endocrinology, even though most of it we forgot when we start doing medicine. We just kind of tell what we think is true. But I read his book. So his book is about a 600-page tome, and you've probably seen it or read it, Good Calories, Bad Calories.
Yep,
it was that was like the original Bible at the time. Read that twice, and then went on to travel to multiple military bases. And I would ask this question at all the bases, has anyone lost 50 pounds and kept it off for a year? And it'd be like 100 people in the base gym. None of them wanted to be there because they all were like remediating from the fitness test. And here's this runner guy, and they all hate to run. But we'd start a conversation around nutrition based on usually one or two people raising their hand who all had the same answer. And the answer was always something like this, Casey. They'd say, well, I gave up all the sugar. I'm not drinking any soda. I gave up bread. I'm doing paleo. And back then, paleo wasn't like paleo junk food in packages that you'd get at Whole Foods. It was like, eat plants and animals. Something you'd kill or gather was paleo. It's basically a low-carb style diet. Or if someone really had guts, they would say this. They'd say, well, I'm doing this thing called Atkins. And I was a doc, so they were afraid to say that because, the immediate reaction they usually get from a doctor. I mean, what would that be in 2012, Casey? If I'm a patient and I told you, the doctor, I'm doing Atkins, what would be your immediate reaction to me?
Oh, it's insane. You would never say that.
Yeah, you're going to have a heart attack like yesterday.
Yep, totally.
But I said, no, look, it's cool. What you stay in this room stays in this room. You're not going to tell your doctor, your mother, or anything. And so that got me. I guess that would be an observational experiment. I would go around and talk to groups and ask the question and observe. But not once did anyone raise their hand and say, I did a low-fat diet. It was all, and these are people that lost significant weight, 50 plus pounds. I'm sure most of them had pre-diabetes. And at the same time, I had to get my own physicals through the military. And, surprisingly, my blood glucose was high and my A1C was in the low 6 range.
Wow.
It didn't look like the standard type 2 phenotype. I was running, I was pretty lean. And it was kind of a curiosity to the doc at that time. And probably never would have had lab tests done if it wasn't mandated. Most dudes don't go to doctors. I mean, would that be a fair statement?
Yeah.
Casey? Yeah, unless they're mandated, by the Marines or something. But they go when they crack their skull or something. But they don't go for regular checkups, but we're mandated to. And they drew a lab called a C-peptide on me because I didn't fit the standard type 2 phenotype. I wasn't obese and didn't have, any of the other markers of a type 2 diabetic. And my level was really low, it was 0.3. And as a family doc, I'd heard of that test, but I'd never ordered it on anybody.
Wow.
I had to go back and look up what that was. And I was like, oh man, I'm not making much insulin. It was like right at the level of a new type 1 is making about that. And they put a CGM on me. That kind of led to the CGM talk. That was my first experience with a CGM, and it changed my life. So it's not as convenient as the ones now that download to your phone. It was more a research style one that you couldn't even see what the numbers were. They had to download it later. It was just like a halter box you'd put on yourself. But I wore that for 3 days and was pretty mindful of what I ate. I ate kind of, my usual cereal and maybe a little pasta, kind of usual carby runner food. And at that time, for about 3 or 4 years, maybe even longer, I was waking up at like 2 a.m. every morning, needing to eat. And I thought it was because maybe I'm just like this hyperactive runner and I'm burning calories. I didn't know what was going on. But when I put that on, that's called reactive hypoglycemia. So I had a substantial second phase insulin response, enough to drive my sugar down, but not the first phase. So I would eat something, even fruit or something, my sugar would go up to about 250, maybe even a bit higher. And then like 2-3 hours later, it comes crashing down, kind of, look like a skateboard ramp going up, and then and then it would just come crashing down, and that would hit at about 2 a.m. because I was always kind of hangry right before bed, afraid I would need to wake up. And I was thinking, well, let me have a little more cereal before bed, and maybe I can make it through the night. But that strategy, I did use that same. Maybe I was probably kind of addicted to the. I mean, it was delicious. You have all your cereal and very sweet. Dried raisins in there. But yeah, so that was my pattern: a bowl of cereal before I go to bed. Not knowing what that did, and then you'd crash, wake up at 2 a.m. Another bowl of cereal. These are salad bowls. These are like, mixing bowls, and thousands of calories. But and I was losing weight. If you look at pictures of me in that time, I was over lean, and that wasn't because I was dieting. I was like putting more calories in my body that you could imagine, and still running okay because I think just headstrong. Most runners will just run till they break, and that was. Yeah, then I changed my diet dramatically, like the next day. Wow. When I saw that CGM. But it takes a while. I mean, until I started wearing CGMs about 2 years ago, Casey, consistently, you kind of ignore what happens between your glucose checks. You check in the morning, check at lunch, but like you could eat some fruit and it would go up to like 200 plus, but by lunch it'd be down. So you think you're okay. You miss all of those peaks unless you have something monitoring you real time. So my A1Cs were still never really that good. They're kind of low 6 range. Thinking I was pretty much low carb other than the fruit, but I still probably had a little too much fruit. I'd given off all bread, switched to big omelets, but the fruit was probably still an offender. And now I'm kind of off that, feeling better.
Interesting. That reminds me of a quote I've heard you say, and I'm kind of paraphrasing here, but you said something that I would say I have observed in my career. And you said, maybe eating fruits and grains works. I just haven't seen it. And that was
for diabetes.
Yeah, right. But that's the standard of care. Like, that's what we tell people to do.
Yeah, we just published, just came up today in the Wall Street Journal is an article about the dietary guidelines for America. We could share it on the show notes. There's a lot of debate around that, which is 50 to 55% of any type of eating recommended by the dietary guidelines for America is carbohydrates. Now, that could be fruit, could be whole grains. Obviously, that's what they want you to eat, not junk food. And I don't disagree with that. I think that's fine. But what we're proposing with the Low Carb Action Network is, well, that's only applicable if you're a well person. When I was in high school, probably ADD, couldn't sit still in class, running 10 miles a day, I could eat all that stuff and would be just fine. But if I gave that to probably anyone who walked into my metabolic clinic, if they ate that way, they would only get worse. So what we have to differentiate is, the advice we give, which is stock advice, there's no healthy food, there's healthy people, and you're not what you eat, you are what your body does with what you eat. So if you want to know if you can have grains and fruit, how would you assess that? I would ask a patient this. So how would you know, Casey, if you can handle whole grain and fruit?
Yeah, that's right. You need to know where your blood sugar is and
where your blood sugar is, especially if you have diabetes and your A1C is in double digits. But my doctor said, or my RD or whoever said grains are good. Well, you ever check your, it's crazy. Like you see hundreds of people, and I'm waiting for the person who says they actively check their glucose after they eat.
Interesting.
It's now that we have the CGMs, continuous glucose monitors, they can't not see it and they can't unsee it. So that's why those tools, if you're out there listening to this and a loved one has type 1 or type 2, if they don't have a CGM, it's kind of like you have a square wheel on your cart. And then they came along with these things called round wheels, and you still have. I'm not making that up. It's like it's dark ages to not have, because it's not expensive, it's not fancy, it's not invasive.
Interesting. Yeah,
so it costs you less than a meal out to have a little CGM button on for a month.
Wow.
A little Libre.
So for the listener, a typical blood sugar test, you would stick your finger, run it through a little machine, get a number back. But this is all real time. You're getting these numbers exactly as they are, and you can see how different things are affecting you. And it could be, primarily diet, but it could also be stress. It could also be, how was your sleep? All of those things change it.
Yeah.
And we had Jen Eisenhart on the show. She did the film Fat Fiction, and they designed a
great movie.
It's a great movie, isn't it? I love the way she did it. I love the attitude and the positivity, and that she actually gave people a plan of things that they could do. And they do this experiment that we talked about where for a week, these people eat, more kind of low carb ketogenic type meal. And then they go off and they go back to eating a low fat diet. And you can just see what's about to happen. And you feel for these poor people, because after a week of feeling like they had great energy, they weren't hungry, they were skipping meals, all of a sudden they are starving and need snacks and meals, and they're miserable. And it's pretty stunning to see the graphs from some of those CGMs. You're right. It looks like a wave.
Yeah, it is. It is stunning. I mean, I'm just scrolling through my one today, and different things affect people. So my highest glucose today was 151 at 9 a.m, and that was after running, before I had breakfast. So exercise, there's cortisol. I slept like crap last night. So that's not that was my highest of the day, which was really a fasted state. Hadn't eaten since probably 7. It's like 14 hours into a fast. My sugar's 151. Then I eat a couple eggs for breakfast, and in 2 hours it's down to 103. So it comes down, but everyone has their own little pattern, and mine would be different. So you can't assume anything. People just need to know what their pattern is, and then work their lifestyle around that. And like you as a coach, you would say, well, gosh, your mornings are super high, even without eating. Maybe have sleep apnea, something that's really disturbing your sleep, and or your exercise is a little too intense, because we make glucose, through exercise. Chill it out a little bit, but that might not be harmful. A little rise with exercise that comes right down. I don't think that little bump is harmful, but everything has, relative to that person, that patient, what their A1C is and what other comorbidities they have, what medications they're on.
That's very interesting. And like you said, this is not an expensive tool. It's not that invasive. It's really easy. And to me, it's interesting because it almost feels like it self-corrects. Like if you can see the numbers right now, you know what you just did, you can stop doing those things and see if it actually works or not, right?
Oh yeah, I just had about half hour before this talk, I had a monster salad, had maybe not a half pound of steak in there, avocado. It's 119 right now, which is pretty good. That's after, I think it was probably about 1,000 calories easily. And that's probably about as high as it'll go, because it was almost all fat and protein, a little bit of leafy green. But now I won't be hungry. I've got an event tonight I have to do. I won't be home till 8 or 9 tonight. So that'll hold me through. I'm not too worried that I need a snack. But what you were saying was really important from that movie about being hungry. So when I switched from the runner's diet, becoming someone with an insulin problem, I was like the guy, because they used to have in hospitals, Casey, the pharmaceutical reps, right? They'd come in and they'd bring bagels, right? They'd bring muffins, and they'd always leave their articles and stuff. So I was always the one who was hoarding that stuff, because, usually 10 a.m. it wasn't, I was hangry. I always had a bar, something that even between the meals, I never felt secure, because I would have these really profound lows. But then immediately when I just got hard lockdown on that last bowl of cereal, 2012, I could have breakfast and not be hungry and make it to lunch, and I could sleep through the night. If anyone has woken up in the middle of the night needing to eat for 3 years and now they can sleep through the night, you feel like a different human being. You're like, oh my gosh, I feel like, yeah, it's hard to describe.
Yeah, totally.
How
No, that
much
was
better you feel.
right. That was my life. You gels and snacks and, bars between clients, and you're hangry. It's not just that your stomach is growling. Like, I'm on a 20-hour fast right now, so I can feel my stomach growling a little bit, but I'm fine. Like, I could go on a 3-hour bike ride if I wanted to right now. It's just so different. It feels so much better.
Yeah, totally. I was sponsored by Power Bar at the time for running, so I even had like free. I had like cases of this stuff in my closet. Like all the whole grain versions, which were still just loaded. They're like 34 grams of carbs per bar, but there was marketed. None of us knew anything back then, so it is what it is. But that's what all the runners would be eating, is all those things, right?
Yeah, I haven't thought about Power Bars in ages. I mean, I've played.
I think, Nestle bought them out. And that's when they started to go big time. But they're still out there. There's so many other bars in that space. They were the original ones. And, that they were innovative way back in the day.
Sure.
Guy was making them out of his garage.
Wow. I didn't know that.
Maxwell.
Wow. Huh. Yeah.
And unfortunately, it's not to belittle it, but he died. He was a Canadian elite level marathoner, and he died of a myocardial infarction.
Oh, wow.
Young age. So, I don't know all the other back history to his health problems, but running does not prevent heart attacks. I mean, we knew that with Jim Fixx, the guy who wrote that original running book in 1976. Every runner knows that, that story. But the guy was like promoting running, but, he had chain smoked for about 40 years before he found religion, at like age 55, and became a type A runner instead, which isn't what I'd advise for people.
Wow. Interesting. So you're mentioning running and endurance sport. And so I think this is very interesting. First, I'm going to ask you, what is your personal diet before a very long run? Like, if you're going to have a big event, let's say multiple hours, what would your diet be before and then maybe during that event?
So we'll take a couple different events. So like a marathon would be kind of a traditional event that anyone listening might do, 26 miles. So, my friend and I, we travel to these things and we get ribeye. I mean, that's now. Back then it would be, carbo loading dinner. So we have ribeye and red wine, and I usually wouldn't eat breakfast the morning of a race. I would have electrolytes are key. So I'm always putting electrolyte in my body, not free water. If it's like the Boston Marathon, which has like a 10 a.m. start, a little later, I probably would have like a little bit of nut butter just as I'm getting to this, because you got to wake up early to get out to Hopkinton, so like 6 a.m., maybe a little bit of nut butter. I like a product called UCAN. I might make an 8-ounce UCAN.
I love UCAN.
Shake. It's got this slow release carbohydrate. But then during the event itself, mostly just salt, electrolytes, because it's a 26 mile. And for me right now, that's about 3 hours. But if you're going to do something longer, for example, 2 weekends ago, I did a 100-miler, which is like 2 days. So that's a totally different beast. And you're kind of like, running and hiking. And then you just have to just play it by intuition, just like if you're hiking the Appalachian Trail, if you're hungry, you want to eat food, not kind of rely. So I kind of like my friend James and I, who's also a low carber, mid-50s. So we had our tradition. We did this together. Had our traditional ribeye and probably a little too much red wine the night before, because we're like, we got to run a long way tomorrow. Not a long time to work that off. And then you just start, like they have aid stations about every 10 miles in this thing, and you kind of just see what they had. But, I probably had maybe 1,000 to 1,500 calories for that 31 hours, because people think they do all this spreadsheet about what they're going to eat. But what they don't realize is you don't really absorb much. Like when you're running, you really can't rely on like what you eat actually making its way into your working mitochondria, because like your stomach just goes, you're nauseated, just you're working hard. So you're kind of like the time it's safe to eat is when you're actually hungry. So you get to an aid station, you get electrolyte. They had bacon at a bunch of these aid stations.
Nice.
Out there. That is actually, I'm not making this up. Bacon during ultra endurance events is like rocket fuel, because it's got protein, fat, salt.
I would think
trickle
salt.
in a little carbohydrate. So like just trickle in I'd have had a couple cheese quesadillas along the way. A couple stations had mashed potatoes, which had butter, and you just pour salt in that.
Wow.
That's good. And I made a blog. I had my CGM on, and at mile 90, I was like,
Wow.
okay, it's the next morning, and I got like 10 miles to go, and the last 10 are like straight up a freaking ridge. So I had like 6 ounces of Coca-Cola, and anyone who does ultra running, Casey, knows that Coke is like rocket fuel. Where you're like at the end, like a little caffeine, little sugar, the GLUT4 insulin
cyclist trick.
pathways.
I've known that for years. Absolutely. It's great.
Yeah, so that shot of Coke put my sugar right at about 200, but it came back down. But it just shows you, even during that, like if you basically are glucose intolerant, not hypoinsulinemic, not making insulin, even while doing something like that, so that's running a race, 6 ounces of Coke, doing that to my blood sugar. Look at the average person who has no idea about this, who gets 30 ounces of juice, not running, fully insulin resistant, doing that day after day under the dietary guidelines, because juice is like fine, right? It's
totally
fruit.
Fine.
it's
healthy.
It's perplexing. It's nonsensical.
Part of this complete breakfast.
CGM on people, and they would just see it. They don't need to follow the government's advice. Just if you have a dashboard on your car and the check engine light's going on, it's going on, right?
Yeah, something's up for sure. We had a listener question. She is on the other side of the mountains from you, a client of mine who I train virtually. She's an endurance athlete, and she follows the work of Dr. Stacy Sims. I'm not sure if you're familiar with her work, but it really focuses in on hormones and cycling inside a woman's body. Are carbohydrate requirements different for women, and are they different in different phases of a normal cycle?
Yeah, that's a hot topic for research now, and I don't claim to be an expert on it. I know there's been some recent publications showing which parts of your cycle you're more insulin sensitive versus more insulin resistant. So if you're more insulin sensitive at a certain point in your cycle, and maybe someone could determine that by their CGM. I mean, it would vary. I would imagine it would vary, from lady to lady. So that banana that, had a big sugar spike at a certain time of your cycle, it's pretty flat. Later on, and that's telling you can tolerate that banana a little bit better, and how you feel. I think sometimes we get too tied up with technology and what our heart rate or heart rate variability or something, or even the CGM. But like, okay, I have energy. I can climb that hill. Okay, I have for a little carbohydrate right now. So I think we have to also trust that's just a life in sport, trial and error. Okay, that didn't work for me. Let me try something completely different. When I was brought up running, there was no alternative path. It was like, okay, you eat carbs, you run. You eat carbs, you run. The word metabolic flexibility, fat adaptation, certainly not in the lexicon of like a college level runner. We just ran around the track. So we just knew one pathway. Mm-hmm. And that pathway was really until, Stephen Finney started to get out there, and Tim Noakes, 8 years ago started talking about this. Yep. That there was no other pathway other than carb loading before events. So I think there is a big hormonal, because metabolism is hormonal, whether you're a lady or a man. Testosterone, goes way down after menopause in the 50s. So what we did earlier in life, growth hormone goes down. You can't eat the same, most likely, at 55 that you did at 22. And that's just the way it is, whether, same thing goes for ladies.
Yeah, interesting. I think that is a great piece of advice, to use the objective numbers, but also not lose sight of the subjectivity of how do you feel? If you feel good, isn't that a wonderful sign that everything is going well? And if you feel bad, isn't that a really also wonderful sign that you need to change something?
Yeah, and in females especially, I wrote a book a couple years ago and have a chapter specifically devoted to females, but talk about what's called the red S syndrome, relative energy deficiency in sport. So if you're a lady out there, athletic, you're strong, and you're having normal, regular menstrual cycles, that tells you a lot is going correct in your endocrine system. There's things we don't even know how to measure, but that tells you that, all the system's working well for you to be a healthy human. But there's a mismatch. So it probably takes 22, 23% body fat to have normal menstrual cycles. You start dipping down below that into the teen range, okay, your cycles start to, not be regular. You're starting to kind of go into that relative energy deficiency syndrome, but you may have your best season of your life. If you cut weight, and you're a track runner, you may have your best 10,000 meter time. But usually what happens is 1 or 2 seasons later, you just break. So it is a little bit of an evolutionary mismatch for women in these endurance sports or aesthetic sports, where performing at your optimum best might not correspond to optimum health. Whereas men, we're just, I don't know what we're designed to do. We're designed to go kill things, but no kidding, women are designed to reproduce. That's the way it is hormonally. And the hormonal drivers are to that state, which is not, running a marathon in 2 hours and 20 minutes.
That's right.
So I think, ladies in sports should be thinking about, okay, this is my racing season. Okay, so things might be a little different here, but I need deep recovery. They're going to need a couple months of deep recovery if they dip into the well a little bit, because the body can't keep dipping into the well year after year after year. And you see that in the college level sports and the higher level sports, especially like running and maybe a bit of cycling, where strength to weight ratio really matters.
That's a really
climbing
good
up
point.
lap to west and such.
Interesting. That's all really amazing information. Thank you for that. Let's take a quick break and come back and talk a little bit more about running. Now, I've been listening a bit to your podcast about running. It sounds like you're in just an amazing part of the world for running. You've already mentioned the Appalachian Trail. A theme that I've heard in your show, I've heard this more than once. You ask somebody what their trail name is. What is that?
Oh, the people that hike the AT, they all have a trail name.
I've never heard of that.
That's kind of their moniker. So think of like if you were going to be on the Appalachian Trail for 6 months, it's like, what is your avatar? Like what? It's like the pilots, the military pilots, all have their call sign.
Like Goose and Maverick,
and it's usually something. Yeah, it's usually something pretty slick, But usually on the trail, it's usually something. It's a single name, usually sometimes one syllable, but yeah, I think everyone, because I think people go find nature in the trail to kind of have a little bit of an alter ego from the normal, industrial, domesticated, corporate, Zoom call life we all live now. It's like you just get out on the trail and you can just be just part of what it is. And that's why I think trail running now is exploding. And I think COVID is probably tick that up a bit. Like every trailhead in the 2-hour radius of Washington, D.C. on a weekend is like bumper to bumper because people are just exiting the cities and rediscovering some of this nature. And
right. What a great place to be and to get your exercise in.
Social distance, right? Fresh air, move. It's like this is the ultimate quarantiner's activity is trail running.
Yeah, that's great. Why trail running and not road running?
Well, I think anyone if you're on a country road, so I think it all depends. Just get outside. So I think nature by definition is where you can just kind of have free thought and free movement. So if you're in Central Park, New York City, you go to Central Park and you might as well be out in the biggest national forest in the world because it's this oasis where you can just escape that world. And that's why people, hundreds and thousands of people every day are running around this place. But yeah, there's a couple good books written. One was called The Nature Fix by Florence Williams, and people have heard about this forest bathing, just some of the brain and neurochemical and endocrine responses that come from just being out in nature, just being out in green. Like when you're out there and you see trees and you're running through trees versus a suburban street, where you read the books. I don't want to kind of dig into what she did for like 10 years and putting electrodes on these people's brains and when they put them in the park. But in my book, I put a chapter, one of the final chapters was, I tried to bring that down to about 10 pages, just the benefit of being in nature. But I think this is kind of how I would frame it to anyone listening, Casey. So if something gives, just like training, if something gives you a good response, that's good. If it doesn't give you a good response, then it's probably not your thing. So if you go out there in nature and you run on a trail or a single lane country road and you come back and that just gives you a good response, then that's your brain, right? That's not because, your aerobic capacity increased. There's something about, their endocannabinoids is probably what it is, so endorphins, these are things our body makes. Endorphins is endogenously, meaning we make it, morphine, and everyone knows the runner's high, and that's real. But there's this other branch called endocannabinoids, and if you're listening there, so it's like pot, right? So this is legal pot. Your body is making pot. It mellows you out, and I don't know if it gives you the munchies or not. You go back from a trail run. Seems like everyone who comes back from a trail run are the mountain bikers, right? They all go drink a lot of craft beer and
that's right.
Eat chicken wings.
Yeah.
But I don't know if that's culture or the endocannabinoids kicking in. I don't know. What do you think? You're out there in Utah, right?
Yeah.
They go ski in the backcountry and they come back and they're just like, just pounding stuff, but
that's
food
right.
and whatever it is.
Yeah, I'll have to pay attention to see if it feels like the munchies or not. That's funny.
Yeah, you come back. I was in the military, so I don't have any comparator about what the real stuff is versus the running, because we got tested my whole career. But when people describe it in the same way, I get this great feeling, when I get out in the woods. So yeah, it's all good.
I love it.
And anything you want to go back and do tomorrow, you train people, right? If they don't want to go do it tomorrow, you're wasting your time.
Yeah.
So if they, and you can go out with the technology now. So I go out in the early morning with this really nice headlamp, and it's completely peaceful. I'll be mostly on kind of rural roads or dirt roads in the dark because I'll step on roots and fall. But it's just spiritual because all you hear is your footsteps, and you got this headlamp and lighting up the whole place, and no cars are out, maybe an occasional dog, but they leave you alone out here. And it makes you want to wake up early to do it again. Like I'd rather wake up and do that than sleep later. It's weird.
Wow.
If I miss that, like something in the rest of my day is just not going to work well. I figure out all my life problems, which are many during that run, and work. Oh, geez, this deadline, or I forgot to email this person. That's the stuff that creeps into your brain. But it's not all bad because it's usually stuff that you actually really need to do that you'd completely forgotten.
Sure. We had another listener question, from one of our mutual friends, Brad Kearns, who I had the honor of interviewing yesterday. He is also a runner, but he's a runner on a golf course. So that's quite a bit different.
Wonderful.
He wanted to know about footwear. What kind of footwear should we be thinking about if we are going to do especially trail running?
So any type of footwear that enhances your natural foot's design and function. So our feet are designed to be flat on the ground and our toes need to be wide. So that's like when you're a kid, it doesn't need to be barefoot, but when we all grew up walking and running, you're in your bare feet. So we had perfectly functioning feet. The feet stabilize the landing, and it's the first line of communication of balance to your brain too, and the most powerful one. So if you're trail running, you need to have balance and stability on the trail, because if you don't, you're just going to roll. So, and everyone, it's like the Goldilocks thing. So some people like a little cushion, some like no cushion, and some like a little more cushion. But the key feature in a shoe is wide, light, flat, meaning you don't have this elevated heel. And wide meaning foot shaped. It shouldn't be tapered at the toe box, meaning your shoe should look like a foot, or else your foot's going to look like a shoe. And I learned the hard way. I had both of my feet operated on over 20 years ago because my foot looked like a track spike.
Wow.
Because we'd squeeze into all these, pointed toed shoes because they were looked kind of sleek, right? Nike made them. And my big toe was bent in at about 40 degrees. And if your big toe is not aligned, your kinetic chain is completely, that's your spring, right? Like think of, if anyone out there listening right now, you can do this, like spread your toes real wide and jump rope. you're like, yeah, I could do that all day. Spring, spring, spring. And now smush your toes together, bend that big toe in about 40 degrees and try to jump rope. And your foot hits the ground like that. And then you have to use all the small muscle energy contractions to get off the ground. So you want to be a human spring. That's ideal running. And watch the Kenyans run, and they're springs, and you can retrain the spring, and the footwear can enhance the spring.
Interesting.
Mix it up too, like all training. You don't go do the same thing. I love barefoot running on pavement, smooth pavement. It's just a wonderful feeling. You just get this other brain chemical reaction just by 200,000 nerve endings. But no kidding, in that 100-mile run, I had cushion on my feet because you're on rocks and roots for 31 hours. But same principles applied. Wow. People say, "Oh, did you wear your 5 fingers on the 100-miler?" I'm like, no freaking way. That's my feet would be exhausted. So I did need, just like you'd have mountain biking, right? So if you mountain bike out there in Utah, you got your road bike for those surfaces, same technique applies, but you're going to have a little bit of shock absorber if you're doing like a 2-day ride.
Yeah.
One of the ranges out there where you're going to be hitting constantly, right? Constant roots and rocks and bumps and stuff.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm currently transitioning into I'm transitioning into a pair of Vivo Barefoots, which I know you're a fan of.
Yeah, they're wonderful.
I really like them. What is some advice you would give somebody for transitioning into a more minimalistic shoe? Because I know that can be problematic, especially if you try to do too much too soon. Do I understand that correctly?
I think it's been overplayed. If you're transitioning into a real food, low-carb diet, you're going to get all these horrible effects. Like eating eggs and meat and vegetables. I've never seen anyone have some massive backlash against that. Other than if they have, true carb addiction, then they just have a hard time breaking that. But what you just described right there, Casey, is the way to transition in. Is most of us walk more than we run. You have a day job, you're walking around. So get in the most minimal shoe, flat. I've got a number of Vivo Barefoot, just casual shoes that I could wear to work, put on a pair of khakis, maybe even a tux if I, kind of blacked out the little V because they were just jet black shoes. And you feel great at the end of the day. Now, to go out and run trail in those, you better be pretty strong. So walking around, so every step you take in your day should be, facilitating restoration of normal function and foot health. So if you're in some horrible dysfunctional shoe, for 10 hours of the day, that's shutting off all the musculature and nerves. And then you want to go out and run for 30 minutes or something. You want to be training all day, just like, I'm at a stand-up desk now, don't sit all day. And, I'm sure Bethany has a whole protocol of how to unwind all the sitting disease with your feet. Yeah, get the body back to normal function, right? Like how are we designed to move? How are we designed to use specific muscles? Everything has a perfect design. Same as metabolism. All we're trying to do in the body is restore the normal state. And so many people now are so far off of that, and they'll never get back to 100%, but everyone can get better and get closer, instead of going the other direction, which is, more support, more widgets in your shoe. Let's try to get the foot stronger.
I love that.
And the shoes help that. Vivo Barefoots are great. Just anything that lets your foot behave naturally. But some people need some different adaptations in their footwear, and that's why we have a store, and that's why we opened it 10 years ago, because I couldn't honestly send people to a traditional running store. They would just get put in some rigid arch support elevated heel cushion shoe, and it would make them worse. So we decided to open a store to do the exact opposite.
I love that. That's so cool. What a great step and such a help in the community, which is something I know you're.
It's not a good business model, especially now to do small business, but we're helping people.
That's awesome.
Keep your day job.
No, I love it.
Any medical people out there thinking of this, you got to keep your day job, but it helps your community to keep these things going.
I love it. When I told Bethany that I'd be interviewing you today, she just lit up. I mean, this is her world, and she's been on barefoot shoes for a very long time. And she goes, "Oh my gosh, you have to talk to him about the big toe and everted feet and knee valgus and all this stuff." And I'm trying to write this stuff down. And I realized very soon that there's no way I could conduct that part of the interview and unlock your brain in a way that needs to be done. So I would love it if we could find another time where Bethany could interview you and we could talk a little bit about foot structure and how that changes things up the chain in the knees and the hips.
We can just talk about the big toe for 45 minutes.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
How to correct the big toe. It's the captain of the ship,
Yep.
So It's really, really important.
Well, you need to talk to
Yours
her.
is jacked up. Get it straightened out. Yeah.
So yeah, maybe we can find another time and talk about some of those structural issues. I think that's really interesting. One last thing I want to ask you about running is you personally have done so many marathons and ultra marathons. Is there one that really stands out as you look back on some of the races? Was there ever one that was your absolute favorite?
I've been doing 2 marathons for almost 30 years now. I've been being in the military. I've run the Marine Corps marathon now 27, 28 times. You kind of lose count, but that was always our kind of competition, and it was always fun competition because we would have an Air Force team, Marine team, Army team, Navy team. And, we'd see a lot of the same friends every year, and you'd line up there and, score it as a team. So that was always a lot of fun. Then I'd always like going to the Boston Marathon because it was just a celebration of running. And when I first started doing marathons, there wasn't like a marathon everywhere every weekend. There's like the Boston, New York Marathon, and Chicago started coming on. So I just started doing the Boston Marathon, and I've done 28 Boston Marathons. It's just fun to keep going back to these same ones. We've had medical conferences at both of these events too. So it's fun to kind of go to the race and actually be part of a medical conference, which WVU is part of hosting, which picks different sports med topics. So you combine like your passion of running with sports science, and you meet a lot of new people, and then, rekindle conversations with people you've just known through the years. And then you go out there race day and you just lay it on the line and go have some fun. These are just, historic races.
Wow, that's amazing.
But now I'm kind of getting a little more into everything's been canceled, right? So I haven't done a road marathon because they've all been canceled since the 2019 Boston Marathon. I did the virtual this year with a friend. We put our number on and, just picked a course to go run in our neighborhood. So it's been a while. And this year's Boston Marathon is kicked down the road too. So that's when I got a little more into some of these, this 100-miler I did a couple weeks ago. I never would have done that if it wasn't for COVID, because I probably would have done the Marine Corps Marathon or something and wouldn't have even known this thing existed.
Wow.
But a friend of mine kind of said, well, I'm doing this new race in West Virginia. It's the first 100-miler in West Virginia. And it seemed like a good idea at the time when what the hell?
Famous last words.
And you hit submit and you sign up. And then you tell a friend, my friend James, who's done, dozen Boston marathons with me. And then I was like, what do you think? You want to do this thing too? And then like within 24 hours, he hits submit. So he's in. So we're committed, at that point.
Oh,
no. You're like, okay, we're on the line, we don't know shit about this, about how to train for it. But,
that's awesome. That's
great.
Movement,
Keep moving.
Wow, getting creative in 2020.
So I would not ask my advice. If you're out there thinking about being a 100-miler, I was a rookie, but my goal was to, listen to my body and keep moving. But there was an interesting study just came out, and we could link to this too. And it was talking about what were the features of ultra marathoners, what made them tick, why did they succeed? Was it like mitochondrial output, VO2 max? But what they determined was it was all about the brain, and you see it's neat, Casey. You see people out there in the ultras, if you line up at the road marathons, everyone kind of looks the same, especially if you're kind of more toward the front of the pack. They like got, fanciest gear. They look lean. They look like marathon track runners. And then you go to an ultra, and these are like sturdy people. Most of them have beards. Some of them carrying hiking poles, but they crush these ultras. They're just like, they're beasts.
Wow.
And it's so much like the folks I know who can just do these repetitive ultra marathons, it's grit, right? It's like that steely determination. They just get the job done, right? They just get the job done.
Wow.
And I think that's what I learned myself. It's like, okay, can I actually do that? You see all these people. Can I just go out there and just get the job done? And just there's going to be down times, and you could fall and all kinds of stuff, but just kind of keep going.
Well, this has been an awesome discussion. Let's take one more quick break, and we'll just ask you a few more questions before we let you go here.
Sure.
Mark, through the years of giving people nutritional advice, one of the biggest items of pushback that I get is that the diet is too expensive. It's cost prohibitive for people. They can't afford higher quality food, and so they end up just going back to a standard American diet. Yet before this interview, you sent me something all about food and cost and low carb on any budget, and it's a beautiful designed book with a whole bunch of like recipes and guides and all kinds of stuff. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I used to get that objection all the time. I mean, I think people are just looking for stones to throw at your method. But I would say hogwash. Gosh, well, I mean, for one, can you afford your diabetes medications and dialysis and all the healthcare you might need?
That's a
You
great
don't
point.
correct your condition. Liver transplants, fatty liver is driving, the liver transplant industry right now. I mean, it takes $18,000 to $20,000 a year of medical care, to take care of someone with diabetes. But if that's you and you're trying to maintain your own health insurance, if you get declared diabetes and, you may be able to get insurance, but your copays are going to, eat right through any savings you have for retirement. So, I mean, this is real deal. I mean, the costs of diabetes, both to your health and to your wallet are, non-sustainable. So, low carb on any budget. So, yeah, let's go through a day. Like, let's go through my day. I'm not fancy. I'm just a dude just trying to eat, and I'm trying to save for my kids' college and retirement. 3 eggs for breakfast, throwing in some vegetables that I have, whatever those are. They're not fancy. I love going to my farmer market, when they're open in the summers and seasons, but I'll go to Aldi's, for example, wonderful store, and get bags of spinach for 99 cents and tomatoes for $1.29 or something, and avocados at 59 cents. So throw like 3 or 4 eggs in a pan. I get those barter with local farmers, but you could go to your store and $1.29 a dozen, and maybe even throw in some bacon that you've cooked up the day before. And then you don't need to snack, right? You're good to go. And maybe you don't even need lunch because that was or maybe you don't even need breakfast if you're low carb because you're just a 2 meal a day. The less meals a day you eat, the less cost it is. And
Yeah, that's right.
People into this space, they're full, right? They usually don't need 3 big meals. They usually pick 2 main meals and maybe a snack somewhere. So right before this call, I had a quick kind of like mini lunch, which was a salad from work because I have a discount. It's a little bowl salad, and I put some steak on there and had some shrimp in there that was in that salad, and I think that cost me $2.
Wow.
And threw some low carb dressing. I love Primal Kitchen, so threw that on there.
Super good.
Flat blood glucose. And later tonight, so I probably, I'll be home late-ish tonight. I don't even know what I'll have, but this is not expensive. You can go to your local store, and I always get what's on sale. Like you buy the biggest family pack of like chicken drumsticks, right? You don't need boneless, skinless chicken breast because that's not what you want. You want to have like meat on the bone, and you always do cook-ups. So I mean, like if I'm going to cook some kind of meat, I'm always cooking enough for like 3 or 4 meals, and then you can throw it on your salad, throw it in your omelet. If you have like any type of grocery store, they have these things called rotisserie chickens. They're usually like $4.99, and you get 2 or 3 meals out of those things. You don't need to buy the expensive stuff, and you don't need to buy anything in a package that says low carb or keto. Don't eat because it's in a package.
Agreed.
So the stuff that's expensive is like low carb products. Low carb ice creams, because they're usually like jacked up 3 times the price of like, your cheap industrial model, what low carb crackers, it could be $8 a box, just don't eat the crackers. I mean, this is it's as simple as this, Casey. It's eating plants and animals. So any animal product that is something you can get locally at a reasonable price. You live near the sea, go to the fishmonger and just get tons of fish. If you live somewhere where you can buy half of a side of beef for the winter and put it in your freezer, I'll do that. Buy like 40 pounds of ground beef from a farmer, maybe trade some shoes. But even think a little old school economy when you're doing this. Okay, does it need to be expensive? Like say you have a product or a skill and you're in a small community and your friend's got chickens, or maybe your friend's, makes cheese or something. nothing you eat on this comes in a package. Absolutely nothing comes in a package. And think creatively, mix ingredients, mix spices. It's in the book, and we can share the link. People can download the PDF of the book.
It's really wonderful. It's really well done.
Well, thank you. It took, I got Christy Sullivan, who works with Diet Doctor, and she's got like a whole tribe of followers. She does low carb cooking with Christy. And so she has tried like every recipe in there on her own children, multiple times. So like if she says this tastes good, I totally trust her because she's, subjected her kids, and then her like millions of YouTube followers. Right? Wow. So if she posted a recipe out on her YouTube channel and it sucked, right, she would be getting like, you get spammed, like her page would just blow up. Say, this is the worst. So she posts something and it's like delicious, 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 delicious.
Good person to follow.
Guys, people think, oh, men don't know how to cook or stuff. I think what's beautiful about low carb, Casey, too, is you don't need recipes, right? Baking, you need recipes, right? Because it's got to be measured precisely, a cup of this, baking powder. But baking does not really exist in true low carb. I mean, it's kind of a luxury item and kind of a slippery one at that. Like if you want to start making low carb baked goods, you better be careful because you can throw 1,000 calories of low carb cheesecake in you pretty easy, thinking you're going keto or something. That's why you see all these products, because they're people that they still haven't addressed their issue, which is, addiction to baked goods. They just get the low carb variety and, eat 5,000 calories a day of stevia loaded fat bombs or something. But no, the traditional way of doing it before the words low carb or keto even got into the lexicon was like original, modified Atkins style diet, which is a lot of veggies and animal protein.
Yeah.
And you can do it on a vegetarian style if you wanted. It just takes, if you can eat eggs, it covers a lot of bases. So say you're vegetarian, but you allow eggs and cheese, you're good to go because they nutrient dense. But if you're restricting eggs and cheese, all animal products completely, you're going to be pretty savvy with how to get the right fats. And you're going to probably have to add some protein, some pea protein or some of these scoop proteins that aren't animal based to get those, especially if you're active. So that's just kind of buyer beware. If you're truly vegetarian, very active, and have metabolic syndrome, but you want to do this in that way, I'm glad to help people come into my clinic. I'll point them to resources that you can do this completely vegan. It's just going to take a little more work and effort.
So I'm so glad you brought up the rotisserie chicken because last week it had gotten cold here. We wanted to do a chicken soup. We were running out of time. And I decided, hey, why don't we go get a rotisserie chicken? So I ran to the store, grabbed a few carrots and some celery and some onions and a rotisserie chicken. The whole thing was less than $10. The carcass for the chicken ended up in the Instant Pot. In an hour, we had real broth and we had soup that night. It was super easy. And like I said, cost probably less than $10. So
delicious.
Yeah, it was great. Yeah. And you're not using, chicken flavored water. It's actual true bone broth. It was so rich and filling. And yeah, it was a little bit of chopping. It was a little bit of prep. In 3 or 4 hours, we had a delicious homemade soup. And it didn't have the highest quality ingredients, arguably, but it was damn good. It tasted great.
No, spot on. Yeah, be creative. Just go to your local market. And, the book we designed, Casey, like half of my state is in what's called food desert. So they don't have a grocery store. They go to these things called dollar stores,
Wow.
And because it's like 60 minutes to a grocery store. And then usually they don't have fresh produce because it's in the middle of West Virginia. But you can go to a dollar store and you can get, you can get eggs, you can get bacon, and dollar stores kind of go supply demand. So if people in the community start demanding more frozen vegetables, maybe even some canned vegetables, things that are just not junk food, maybe those dollar stores can start stocking more of that. But you can do pretty well in a dollar store if you know what to do. And maybe you'd get some other kind of ingredients, in the mail, the non-perishables. But most everything on a good low-carb diet is a perishable. It was once alive. And I think that's a good, kind of truth serum for, should I eat it? Was this thing once alive?
Yep.
Meaning a plant or an animal or a fish? Or did it come out of a factory?
I love that.
All those keto products.
Yep.
They aren't real food. They're processed.
Yep. No, I agree. Well, Dr. Cucuzzella, this has been an amazing discussion. You've given us a lot of really good things that we can plug and play into our lives. You create a ton of wonderful content, and it's available. It's easy to find. It's accessible. People can understand it. They can work with it at any education level. They can work with it at any budget. And so we really appreciate you and your work and everything you've done for the community. Can you tell people where they can find you?
Yeah, so I work at West Virginia University. So I have a website, drmarksdesk.com. That links to a number of places that you can find. We host races. It has my store, Two Rivers Treads, a site called Nature Prescriptions. I wrote a book called Run for Your Life. So if you look up that and my name and go any channel, and you'll find that. So that kind of covers, everything I've tried to learn my whole life. And I think what was nice about writing that book is pretty much everything that I put in that book has only kind of become more studied and more valid. So if I had to write that again today, I don't think I'd be throwing any chapters out. I think it's still solid. It was a couple of years ago.
That's amazing.
And then we can share on your page the link that people can download the low carb on any budget guide.
Great. And
it's a nice resource for people just to learn about. It's made for patients. It doesn't just have it has the last part's recipes, but it basically gives at a patient level, patient reading level, not doctor speak, what this is, who it's for, how you assess, what are the risks, what are the benefits. Just go through it page by page, and certainly reach out to me if I can help. I'll give you my email on here, afrundoc@gmail.com. If you're a healthcare practitioner, clinician, coach, or someone, and I can help you at all. The more people we can get in every single space of healthcare, from people that are health coaching to the doctors, pharmacists, RDs, nurses, administrators, and then finally maybe the federal government will decide that dietary guidelines for America are not meant to be given out to patients with diabetes, under the auspices that this is a healthy way of eating. That's a long time coming. We have to change things from the bottom up.
Yep, I agree. And that's the only way we can move the ball forward. And you are doing that. You're such a great example of somebody who is not only learning, but you're also sharing. And again, we really appreciate that here. I really look forward to speaking with you in the future. And thank you very much for coming on to talk to our guests.
Cool. We'll talk about the feet next time.
Awesome. I would love it. I'm going to sit back on that one and let Bethany do the asking because she has that kind of a brain. So we will very much look forward to that. And this has been another episode of Boundless Body Radio. As always, thank you so very much for listening to Boundless Body Radio. It's really inspiring and amazing to see some of the reviews that we have been getting, and also to receive so many messages and emails about how these episodes have improved our listeners' lives. And so thank you so very much. We are so happy to bring these episodes to you and provide them for free, and we really hope that they help you in your life. We have just passed 2 major milestones, which is absolutely mind-blowing to me. And basically, we did both of these in pretty much the exact same day. We have just passed 100,000 downloads worldwide of Boundless Body Radio, and we have just launched our 250th episode, which is absolutely amazing. Like I said, I never imagined we could reach that many people. We always want to keep you updated on things that we're doing on our website. So if you go to myboundlessbody.com, you can always see what we're up to. This month, we have a link that you can go and schedule a functional movement screen, which we do virtually over Zoom. A functional movement screen is a series of 7 different movements and 3 different clearing tests, which is designed to find weak links in the body, such as muscle imbalances and joint stability issues. It's a really great tool for discovering inefficient movement, and even if you're not experiencing pain in certain areas of your body, it's something that can prevent injury later on. Some muscles need to be stretched, some need to be strengthened, and we can help you create a plan around that so that you can stay healthy and continue to move well for the rest of your life. So again, you can go and schedule that at myboundlessbody.com. You will also see the other services that we offer. You can always schedule a complimentary 30-minute consultation with us to really chat about anything that you like. And remember, if you are enjoying Boundless Body Radio, please take a minute, give us a rating or review on Apple. It really helps get this passion project out to other people. And thank you again for tuning into Boundless Body Radio.